Hi, my name's Joe. I live in Massachusetts. I have 3 children and 5 grandchildren, and I don't know about you, but I've been very concerned about our country lately. And it seems like, it's out of control, the spending. They just spend billions and billions of dollars. And I've spent the last couple of months trying to figure out what's going on, and I've studied our government. And I think I've come up with a reason that all this is happening and a very easy solution to correct the problem. That sounds kind of crazy, but take a look over here for just a minute. This is a chart of the spending, our government spending, corrected for inflation since the government inception in 1776 up until today. And you can see that for the longest time, our government spending stayed pretty level. It went up a little bit when there was times of war, came back down again, and it fluctuated a little bit, but nothing compared to what happened over here. And you look at this, and it's gone from down here all the way up there in like the last 30 or 40 years. And you wonder why did that happen? Something happened right in this period here that caused that to happen. And I want to take a few minutes and explain to you what happened, because something definitely caused that. And something shifted the balance of power in our government. We changed a law, one particular law, and it made a difference in the balance of power. So I just want to take, and let's look at what the structure of our government was when we were first founded. When we first set the government up in 1776. This was the structure of our government at that point. We had the people elected the House of Representatives, and they also elected the state legislatures. Now, that we do today, but back then, for the first 140 years of our country, the senators were actually elected by our state legislature. And that's kind of hard to imagine, because most of the people that would remember that have died, because we haven't done that for about 90 years. But the way it was set up originally was that the state legislatures elected the senators, and that was their representative in Congress. And the House of Representatives was elected by us, the people, and that was our representative in Congress. And this created a system of checks and balances, and probably everybody's heard that term used before, system of checks and balances and balance of power. This is where it all comes into play here. And what happened here is that the people voted the state legislature, and so they were the check to keep the state legislature from getting too powerful. And the state legislature elected the senators, and that's what kept our federal government from getting too big. Because if you think about it, the state legislature would not want the federal government to get real big and overpower them and tell them what they could and couldn't do. And so they elected the senators, we elected the House of Representatives, and that created a balance of power that set up, and it kept all 3 of these powers pretty much equally intact. And as you can see, there wasn't any great federal spending during that period until after this change was made. And then all of a sudden, we started spending huge amounts of money, and this federal government got very, very big. Now, in this process, the state legislatures elected the U.S. senators for a period of 6 years. However, they could be replaced at any time by a 2/3 vote of the senators. So the senators were very much controlled by the state legislature in this particular one here. Now, one thing to point out here that's very important is the fact that our U.S. senators in this situation were elected by a group of only maybe 100 or 200 people. And what that meant is they did not need to raise any campaign funds. And that's really important, because it prevented special interest from affecting our Senate. Okay, again, they were elected by just a couple of 100 people, probably people that knew them, or if they needed to campaign, they could do that relatively easily. And again, this is how it was set up originally. It's not a new idea. It was just the way that our founders set the structure of our government up. Now, this worked very well, with the exception of there were 2 problems that arose. One of them was the fact that in this election process here, because you were dealing with only 100 or 200 people, it wasn't uncommon for there to be a tie vote. And this sounds like a small thing, but what would happen is you'd have 2 candidates, and they'd have a tie vote, and neither side would give in. So what happened that several times, there were state legislatures that didn't have any senators in place for a year or 2. And so this actually became a major problem, just the fact that nobody knew how to break the tie. The second problem that arose was that as the population increased, it became more and more expensive for the state legislatures to become elected. They had to spend more money on their election campaigns. So they set up election campaign funds, And as soon as they did that, it opened the door for special interest and big money to come in and influence them. Now, what was happening was that money would come in and say, we'll give you money so that you can get elected here, but we want you to vote for the senator that we want to get elected. You see, so it allowed for special interest to come in here and manipulate the U.S. government by electing the senators that they wanted elected. And that became an issue as well. So these two issues needed to be addressed. So what the government did is that they looked at this and they said the people are electing the state legislature and the state legislature is electing the senators. So why don't we just eliminate the state legislature in there and have the people elect the U.S. senators directly? Because there are too many people to be bribed. They didn't need the money. And there were too many people to have a tie vote. So this looked like the common sense answer to the fact, just get them out of there so that they can't be manipulated, and this would work out well. And this is the structure of government that we use today. Okay. Now, looking at this, it looks fine, but there are some problems with this that arose. First of all, the U.S. senators now were elected directly by the people, and what this meant is that they needed to raise large sums of money to run their election campaigns. It takes between $5 and $10 million to run a successful Senate campaign. So what this did is that it opened the control of the Senate up completely to special interest, because they're not going to come up with that money from anywhere other than special interest. And that's what is running our national budget up, is the fact that special interest has basically controlled our Senate. You would think that because we elect them, we control the U.S. senators. We do not. They are controlled and very heavily influenced by special interest. Special interest gives them the money so they can run a successful campaign and get elected by us. But basically, we're represented here by the House of Representatives in Congress, and the special interest basically runs the Senate, and they control what's going on. And that's the thing that's running our government. There's no balance here anymore. You see, the state government has been cut right out of the picture. They were the ones that kept the government from getting too big, and they've been eliminated from the process. You've probably heard about state rights and all that in history class, whatever, but they've been eliminated from the process, and that's the problem. So the government is now out of balance here. The second problem that shows up here is the fact that these U.S. senators now also have to answer directly to the people. And what that means is that they have to do everything that the people want. They have to keep them happy, they have to give them lots of benefits, and be very politically correct. And just to give you an example of what position that puts them in, let's say that you're a parent for a minute, and it's your job to run your household and to make sure the bills are paid and to make all the decisions. That's basically what the U.S. senators did for our country. Now just imagine for a minute how your job would change if all of a sudden your children were given the right to vote you out of office and put somebody else in your place. That's kind of a funny thought, but that's what we did to our U.S. senators. And if your children could vote you out of office, what you would need to do is you would need to give them all the new toys that they wanted. You'd have to take them on nice vacations. You'd have to let them stay up late if they wanted, because otherwise they'd vote you out and replace you with somebody else. You see, and that would destroy the structure of the family. You know, you probably would try to keep up with it as long as you could. You'd borrow money to give them all the things that they wanted, and basically you would bankrupt yourself eventually, and it would destroy the structure of the family. And that's what we've done here. We've taken these senators who could make decisions before without necessarily having to be affected by us. And we've taken them and we made it so that they have to now be politically correct and they have to answer to us. Okay? Now this was the 17th Amendment to the Constitution that did this. And it changed the structure of our system. It seemed like a good move at the time. But our system is now flawed. It's just changed the structure so that our senators can no longer do the job that they were supposed to do. They're now controlled by special interest money, and they have to do that. So it's thrown the balance of power out. It wasn't the intention originally. This was just a mistake that happened because they tried to fix this election process. You see? And so it needs to be changed. This is the structure, and this is the flaw in our government right now. Just to give you an example of how that structure is present in other areas of our country. Let's look at business. Let's just say General Motors for a minute. Okay? And there is a balance of power here in this structure. We have stockholders who elect a board of directors to represent them at the bargaining table. And their job, the board of directors' job, is to keep the company healthy and to return a good dividend to the stockholders. So that's one force that exists here in this scenario. The other force is the workers of the company. Okay? And they have formed unions, and they elect a union representative to go and to represent them at the bargaining table. And these two forces, the board of directors and the union representative, those two forces work against each other to keep the company healthy. You see? And in good times, everybody gets a little more money. At bad, when times are difficult, like they are right now, the workers might have to pick up some of their insurance, and the stockholders have to do with less dividend. But this system ensures that the stockholders will get a fair dividend and the workers will get a fair wage. And that's what keeps this company healthy. Now, let's just take a look for a minute if we altered this structure a little bit, kind of like we did with our government. And we set it up so that the stockholders no longer elected the board of directors. They were now elected by the workers. So you have the workers electing the union representatives, and they're looking out and trying to get more wages and better benefits and less working hours and all that for the workers. And the workers also are electing the board of directors to also get them higher wages and better benefits. So you have two forces here now that are pulling for the workers, trying to get them more wages, more benefits. And you can imagine what it would do to the company. It will eventually bankrupt the company because the company, nobody's looking out for the good of the company in this situation. Everybody's just looking out for the workers. And eventually it would bankrupt the company. So how can we fix this situation? Well, I believe that if we restored this structure to the way it was before and had the stockholders electing the board of directors again, that this company would slowly turn around and it would repair itself and it would become a healthy company again. The reason being is that the board of directors would start making decisions again based on what was best for the company, not necessarily what was best for the workers, you see. So I believe that restoring that power, the balance of power, would correct that situation. Now, where are we right now in our country? Well, this is our structure, as we talked about before. Special interest is heavily controlling the Senate. Their hands are tied because they have to please the people all the time and do what is politically correct. They can't deal with things that need to be dealt with. So both of these groups have to answer to the people. Our company is now $10 trillion in debt, which is an incredible amount of money. $1 billion, somebody told me the other day that 1 billion minutes ago was when Christ was born. That's 1 million. These are trillions. And I figured out that if we were to try to repay our national debt at this point, if we could pay it off at $1 billion a day, it would take over 30 years to pay that off. Paying $1 billion a day. That's how much in debt we are right now. That graph showed it. We're just going incredibly into debt. It's out of control spending. Every day you hear on the TV where they're giving another $1 billion to this group or that group, and they're just spending it like crazy, and they're not dealing with the things that need to be dealt with. Our Social Security system right now is going to crash into the ground in another 10 years because of all the baby boomers. And no one will touch it. No one will deal with it because they have to be politically correct. They know that if they bring that up, they're going to get voted out of office. So the only time they'll deal with anything was when it's in a crisis situation. The banking industry right now is in a crisis situation, and that's why they're dealing with it. They knew several years ago that this was going to be a problem, but no one would change it because the banking industry, special interest in the banking industry told them, no, you don't change the law. And it's interesting, I traced back just to look at what actually caused this whole thing with the banking industry. And believe it or not, it goes back to 1999 during the budget crisis. I don't know how many of you remember the budget crisis, but there was no federal budget signed. And there was a huge pressure on the federal government to get the budget worked out and signed because everybody was wondering whether they were going to get their checks or not. And there was a huge pressure on the budget. And there was a senator from Texas who had been heavily lobbied by the banking industry for several years. Millions of dollars in lobbying money he had gotten. And he put together a bill which would do away with the Glass-Steagall bill, which was a bill that had been put in effect right after the Great Depression. And what it did is it kept the banking industry from doing exactly what it did today. And that senator taking that money for his re-election campaign, passed that bill. The last version of that bill, the night that they were going to pass the final version, he slipped that bill in, and he got up on the floor of the Senate and he said, this is good for everybody, just believe me and pass it. And that deregulated the banking industry. And that is exactly why our banking system has had the problems and the whole financial thing has happened. So that was directly related to this situation. There was no balance of power. If this state legislature had been appointing that senator, he would not have been able to do that. And that's, you can see the extreme amount of financial problem that has put us into. So this is where we're at. You know, everything is going downhill. They're spending more and more money. How can we fix it? Well, I believe that if we take and we put the structure of our government back the way it was, again, this is not a new idea. This is the way our founders set the government up, and they did it for a reason. There was a balance of power. So if we return it so that the state legislature elects the senators to represent them, and the people elect the House of Representatives to elect them, that will return the balance of power. The senators will no longer need any campaign funds to get elected, so that will take special interest out of the equation. And they will no longer have to be politically correct. They can start to deal with some of the issues that really need to be dealt with and that are difficult. You see? So now, if we do this, we come back to those two original problems that we had. Remember the issue with the tie vote? Well, I believe that a good solution would be for that. The people elect the state legislature. We also elect the governor of the state. So I think he would be an appropriate person to assign that if there's a tie vote in this election process, that he's the one that breaks the tie. There is, I know in Congress, there are times when the vice president votes to break a tie. So this has been done before, and I think the governor would be a good person to break that tie. The other situation where we had special interests coming in and basically bribing the state legislature to elect certain senators, that can be dealt with in the same way that we deal with it over here. When you and I go into the voting booth, no one knows how we vote. I could give you $1 million to vote for the candidate that I want you to, but when you go into that voting booth, I don't know who you voted for. So you can vote your conscience, and I have no idea of it. So that is set up to protect, to keep people from manipulating the system. And if we just take that same process over here, that when they elect their candidate to sit in Congress, that one vote is a secret ballot. And what that will do is that will prevent special interests from being able to manipulate the system. Because they can give all the money they want to these state legislatures. But when that state legislature goes to cast his ballot for the U.S. Senator, he can vote his conscience and he can vote for the person that he believes will be the best candidate. The other thing that secret ballot would allow is it would allow for let's say, a Republican legislature to vote for a Democratic candidate for Senate if he felt that candidate was going to be a better candidate. And that legislature would not have to deal with retaliation from his party leaders. You see, so we might end up with some better senators as well. So those are my thoughts on how to fix this problem. I believe they would work. So what we need to do is we need to repeal that 17th Amendment. We need to do a new amendment and repeal that 17th Amendment. But again, this is not a new idea. It's been done before, but it would take the influence of special interests right out of Washington, you see. And before, it's funny, I've explained this to several people over the last few months, and some of them have been kind of historians. And one of the things that two of them have mentioned to me is that early in our U.S. history, we used to have great statesmen as senators. They would commit their lives to running the states and in this country, and they would put aside their own needs and put the needs of the country first. And what both of them mentioned is that about the time that this law was changed, since then, all we've had is politicians. We've never had any great statesmen anymore, you see. And I believe that if this system was put back in place, these people here would not have to bend down to special interests. They could vote their conscience. They could do what they went there to Congress to do. And this would restore the balance of power to our government, and I believe it would work. So how are we going to make this happen? Well, if you look at the situation here, nobody in our government is going to want to make this change. The senators are probably not going to want to give up all the money and power that they currently have. The special interest groups are going to fight this vehemently because they're going to lose control over the government that they have now. The lobbyists will be against it. It's going to have to be a grassroots movement. This is going to have to come from you and me and your brother and your sister. It's got to come from the people because we've got to change this. Now, there's two ways that this law can be changed, that we can change an amendment to the Constitution. The first way is that going through legislation of the House and the Senate passing a bill and the states ratifying it. And that's the method that will not work here because the government does not want this changed. The second way that's built into the Constitution, it's never been used before, but it is a way to change the Constitution. And that is for 2/3 of the state legislatures to call for a constitutional convention, put this amendment forth, and ratify it. And that is the route that we need to go. It's never been used before. This is a huge undertaking, but it needs to happen if our government is going to get back in balance. And what I've done is I've set up a website to do this. It's www.fixtheusa.org. Now, what I would like people to do is I would like people to go there and to register. If you can put in your name, address, and your email address would be wonderful. I do understand that a lot of people don't like registering on websites. But if you believe in this concept and you would support legislation about it, if you can even go on and just put in your street name and your zip code. And those two things will allow me to automatically send an email to the correct state legislatures, letting them know that somebody from Elm Street in Middlebury, USA has looked at this video and they would support legislation that it describes. So that will allow us to let our state legislature know that we support this legislation and we would like them to do that. The other thing that I would like people to do is to share this with as many people as you can. Obviously, if we're going to do this, we need to educate masses and masses of people about how this will work. Okay? So I would like people, if you would, to forward this information to other people. Talk about it at work. You know, hey, did you hear about that 17th Amendment thing that's going around? Okay? Just to notify everybody that we can about that. And if you feel funny about emailing other people with different things, they say don't talk about religion and politics, and this is kind of political, but if you don't want to email people and let them know who they are, who you are, then I've set up a place on my website where you can just put an email address in, click send, and it will send a simple, anonymous email to the recipient that just says basically, someone looked at this video and thought you'd be interested in it. And that way you can share this with other people, and if you want to remain anonymous, I totally understand that. It's kind of a personal thing. But this will allow you to pass the word on to other people if you believe in this concept and not really get involved yourself. So the other thing is to notify your state representatives about this and your state legislature. Just call them, and you can look on the website and find out who your state legislatures are. Just call them and let them know that you've looked at this video and you really feel that the 17th Amendment needs to be repealed and that they should check into it and that you would support legislation to that effect. And this will allow them, the state legislatures, to become more and more knowledgeable about this. And when you really look at this, they were the ones that would be in favor of this happening because it would give them back the power that they were given originally. We've probably all heard the term states' rights and all that, and that's what this is exactly. They would be getting their right back to have some say in the federal government. And that was taken away from them before, and it needs to be restored. If you have any questions on this, watch the video again. I've thrown a lot at you here in the last few minutes, but it all makes sense if you begin to understand it. So research it on the website. There's several places where you can research this concept. Several people have written about it, and you can research that. So do that if you would. If you have any questions, contact me, Joe Eldridge, and you can get the email address. It's joe@fixtheusa.org, and email me. If you'd like to get more involved with this, I would love it. It's a change that has to be made in our government, and I can't do this alone. I need people to join us and to come on board. So if you want to get more involved, get in touch with me. It all makes sense. It all makes sense, you see, and we're not doing anything different here. We're just putting it back the way it was. And I hope, I'm not a real good speaker, but I hope that I've explained this in a way that you can understand why our government is in the situation it is right now. Why the spending is out of control, why the government itself can't make any decisions, nothing getting done. This is the change that needs to happen. You know, everybody's talking about change right now. Let's send new people down there. Well, that's not going to make any difference if we send them into a structure, a government process that's flawed. And it is flawed because the balance of power is not there anymore, you see. So I hope that you can understand that and that you can support this process. I believe that this will correct a lot of the problems in our nation if we can put that back in power and get special interests out of Washington, get the senators so they can deal with the things that they need to again. And I really appreciate your time here today, and thank you. And if you want to get in touch with me, again, it's Joe Eldridge at fixtheusa.org. Thank you very much for your time.